Lyle. Well, like Ellen said, he is no stranger. He's actually a friend to the Black Collective. I would like to introduce our Congressional District 6 U.S. Rep, Congressman Derek Kilmer.
Hello.
Hey, Derek.
Good to see everybody.
Oh, Derek, I'm sorry. Congratulations on your advancement into the general.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And it's good to still be employed. I figured I'd keep my remarks reasonably brief. I thought I'd give just a quick update on some stuff that's happening in our nation's capital. And then if folks have issues on your minds or questions I can answer, I'm more than happy to do that too. First, just some good local news. I think many of you know I serve on the Appropriations Committee, and a big part of my role on that committee is just trying to get wins for Tacoma and for our region. In this last spending bill that was signed by the president earlier this spring, just as an example, we were able to secure funding for 2 local projects for the construction of affordable housing on the hilltop. And obviously we've got tremendous challenges with regard to housing affordability and homelessness. We just passed out of the House just a couple weeks ago another funding bill for this upcoming fiscal year, and included 3 projects specifically for Tacoma. One, to very significantly invest in the Tacoma Rescue Mission and its expansion to try to address some of the issues around homelessness in Tacoma and trying to provide more beds and more services to people who are experiencing homelessness. Importantly, also, we were able to secure some funding for the YWCA. Unfortunately, as many of you know, and Lord knows, we had issues related to domestic violence and family violence prior to the pandemic. Unfortunately, those issues have gotten far worse as a consequence of the pandemic and some of the just increasing strain in our society. And they want to expand their services, and we were able to get some money in the budget for them. And then also the Asia Pacific Cultural Center is hoping to build out a new facility, and we were able to secure some funding for that project too. So that's a big deal. Getting projects like these done takes a village, and it's part of the reason that I serve the role I serve on the Appropriations Committee, because it puts me in a position to help make sure that the federal government is part of that effort. I guess the other thing I just want to share with you is probably the thing that's coming up most right now is that people are feeling the pain of rising prices. Inflation is real, and it's a problem when the folks I represent, when our friends and neighbors can't afford the stuff that they depend on. The good news coming out of the pandemic is that we've seen record job creation. We've now actually created all of the jobs that were lost during the pandemic, and unemployment is the lowest it's been in 50 years. The bad news is that corresponding with that, not just in the United States, but all over the world, you've seen an increase in inflation. So what are we doing about it? Some important things. On Tuesday, the president's going to sign a bill called the CHIPS Act that is focused on trying to address some of the shortages that have driven up prices. So just as an example, any of you who've driven by an auto dealer lately will notice there's something missing at your local auto dealer. Cars. They've got a tremendous shortage, and that's not because people in Detroit and Ohio have stopped working. It's because there's a chip shortage. The United States invented the chip or the semiconductor. Unfortunately, we only make about 10% of them here in the United States, and as a consequence, all of these things that require chips, everything from automobiles to appliances, to PCs, to you name it, is really hamstrung right now because we're depending on other countries where they have had shortages. The bill that the president's going to sign on Tuesday seeks to end that shortage and to create jobs here in America. That will have the added benefit of reducing prices. Now, that's not going to happen overnight, but I think that's going to be a really big deal. Importantly, that bill actually includes a pilot version of a bill that I drafted to focus on helping communities that have faced persistent economic distress. That can be entire communities or regions like the Olympic Peninsula, or it can be parts or neighborhoods of communities. And we all know areas here within our region that have struggled for a long while. And it will provide some flexible and long-term economic help for those communities. I'm happy to talk more about that. The House has also passed a bill that's focused on gas prices and trying to reduce gas prices. Among other things, that bill would provide some new tools for the Federal Trade Commission to go after oil companies for price gouging. It is not an accident that every major oil company has booked record profits for the last 2 quarters. I don't think it's right for them to profit off of the backs of the American people who are struggling right now. We've also seen a bill just recently signed into law that's focused on shipping reform to try to address some of the exorbitant shipping fees that international shipping companies are charging. Those costs are being passed on to consumers. And with this reform bill, that's going to make a difference too. And then finally, as we speak, the Senate is working on passing a bill just to try to give American families a break. It would, for the first time, allow drug price negotiation under Medicare, which would have a substantial impact in reducing drug prices. On average, American American seniors pay $8,000 per year on prescription medications. This would cap those expenses at $2,000. So that's a really big savings for the average family, and for some families even more. It also makes important investments in combating the climate crisis, which, if we're going to see gas prices decline, we have to end our dependence on fossil fuels. Again, that's not going to happen overnight, but I think some of these investments are going to make a really big difference. Finally, I just want to acknowledge Courtney from my team is on the Zoom as well. Half of our team here in the district does what we call casework. So, most commonly that's issues with the VA in our neck of the woods, oftentimes Social Security, Small Business Administration. Over the course of this pandemic, we've tried to, tear down some barriers for folks who are trying to access SBA assistance. Right now, it's a lot of people who are traveling for the first time and didn't realize they have an expired passport. It turns out we can even help with that. So I would just invite you, if you or someone you know has an issue, please put them in touch with us. Also, we just want to invite anyone who's interested to sign up for our monthly newsletter to stay up to date on what's going on in DC. The link is just kilmer.house.gov, and maybe Courtney, if you could drop that in the chat as well for folks. So again, I don't want to talk at you. Maybe that was longer than you wanted, but if you have issues on your mind, questions I can answer, I'm open to that. I know you have a full agenda, so I'm not offended if you have to move on.
We are ahead of schedule, and so we have a significant amount of time to chat with you and Courtney. As usual, Ellen will recognize the hands of individuals as they provide questions for our Congressman.
Thank you, Lyle. Yes, Ms. Gale?
Yeah, I see every now and then a commercial that talks about, well, if the I don't know if it's just hype or if there's anything being discussed in Congress right now or in the Senate about if the Republicans are successful in their bids to take office, that within 5 years we'll lose Social Security and Medicare. I don't know if that's just a scare tactic, or is that really being discussed as part of their platform, or what do you know anything about that?
I do. And unfortunately, the proposals that have been made by Senate Republicans and by the majority of House Republicans would mean substantial reductions in Social Security and in Medicare. And listen, we already saw this. We already saw this attempt previously. When Paul Ryan was the budget writer, they proposed reductions in Social Security, reductions in the cost of living adjustment, increasing the retirement age. They already proposed these things, so it's not a surprise that they're talking about doing it again. Same thing with regard to Medicare. They've already proposed those reductions, and so it is a real concern. And and again, I'm here in my official capacity, so I'm going to say this just speaking fact, not speaking politically, just the facts, right? You contrast what they've proposed with what Democrats in the House have proposed, which is expanding Medicare. The House actually passed a bill that would expand Medicare eligibility, expand Medicare to cover hearing, vision, and dental, and allow price negotiation for prescription drugs and cap out-of-pocket expenses. So it's a very significant contrast, right? The Democrats are pushing to expand Medicare and cover more people, and Republicans are proposing cutting it. Same thing, sadly, with regard to Social Security. I mentioned that they've got proposals to reduce Social Security. You now have myself and a majority of Democrats sponsoring a bill called the Social Security 2100 Act, which would extend the solvency of Social Security through the year 2100. It would increase benefit levels and increase the cost of living adjustment so that the costs that seniors face, that they're actually getting a COLA that is reflective of the cost that seniors actually face. That comes with a cost, and the cost in that bill is borne by people who earn more than $400,000 a year. I don't represent a whole lot of people who make more than $400,000 a year. So, and I represent a lot of people who are going to benefit from seeing an increase in Social Security benefits. So we're working to get that bill passed.
Thanks, Derek.
You bet.
Mm-hmm. Les.
Good morning, Representative Kilmer. Thank you for being here. My questions are kind of three-part. With the history of environmental degradation in Tacoma and down at the port, are you or have you been approached by any organizations or corporations that would introduce green energy industries at the port of Tacoma and incorporate Biden's microchip manufacturing effort? I mean, he promoted the microchip processing, coming back to America when he first got into office. He said it would create 2 million jobs. And we have an opportunity at the port to create those industries at the port and provide living wage jobs for Tacoma residents. In that question, have you been approached or are you working on anything that gears towards, the environmental degradation at the port through industry?
Yeah. Let me unpack both of those. So on the microchip side, listen, Pierce County has a history of success in that industry. We had a large Intel facility in DuPont. We had the microchip facility in Puyallup, which, closed 20 years ago. But, we have a history of success in that industry. And, as you see the federal government create incentives for domestic, part of the problem is not just that you saw those jobs leave Pierce County. Those jobs left America, right? So having legislation be signed on Tuesday to bring those jobs back to America means that we have real opportunity in Pierce County. I don't know if those jobs, Les, will happen at the port. They may happen out in Frederickson, which is, has a lot of port property. They could happen down in DuPont. They could happen in Puyallup, but we have, to the point of your question, we have amazing skilled workforce. We have places like the UW Tacoma Institute of Technology that's, pumping out young people who have amazing capacity in this space. So I think there's real opportunity once the president signs this bill for the state of Washington and for our region to benefit. On the clean energy side, there's a few things that are happening. One, you've seen substantial investment in trying to clean up some of the environmental degradation that you spoke to. One of the things that I have pushed is, I serve on the Interior and Environment Appropriations Subcommittee. And so funding for things like the Superfund cleanup, where it's toxic site cleanup, that accrues to our benefit, unfortunately, because we have a lot of toxic sites that need to be cleaned up. On top of that, as you see, if we're able to see this reconciliation bill pass, it creates a bunch of incentives for domestic manufacturing, domestic R&D in the clean energy space. And I'm not sure, because he's now a Denver Bronco, whether I'm allowed to quote Russell Wilson anymore. But, Russell Wilson said, why not us? Right? And that's my view of the jobs in this renewable energy space. Why not us? We have seen some businesses kind of kick the tires on making investments here in Pierce County, and frankly, in Kitsap County too. I was out at the Port of Bremerton earlier this week, and they actually have a renewable energy company that's moving in there. Again, why not us? Those jobs don't have to happen in Silicon Valley or in Bellevue. They can happen here in Tacoma.
Other questions for Representative Derek Kilmer? This is an important opportunity for us to ask somebody who is in the room with a vote.
Oh, Miss Christina, good morning, dear.
Good morning. This isn't a question. It's just a thank you. Thank you, Representative Kilmer, for just being present and available for us at the Black Collective, being present and available as serving as a trustee at Bates whenever we have any inquiries. So just thank you for the great work you do in our community.
Thank you. And thank you for your partnership, and thank you for your stewardship of Bates. It's an extraordinary asset for our region. And I always like coming out there because it's neat to see new opportunities created for people. I visited the health sciences program recently, and Lord knows our employers need more people going into the allied health fields, and it was just fun talking to these students who are going to have all sorts of economic opportunity as a consequence of what you guys are doing at Bates. So thank you for that.
So Representative Kilmer, go ahead.
Mr. Mason?
Yes, sir. Derek Kilmer, I am out here in Port Orchard, Washington, in the 6th District. I'm a firm believer in the whole Washington push for Medicare for all. And I guess my question to you would be, why don't you support that? Why can't we get behind that? Just knowing that it'll be something that literally, takes away that big money cost and puts the people before profit. And I'll yield with that.
Yeah. Well, let me start by just acknowledging I'm not content with the status quo of our healthcare system. We have a system that's too expensive and too few people are covered. It's why this discussion that is happening in the Senate right now really matters. If we're able to get this passed, and it looks like we're going to be able to get this passed, 10 million people are going to have healthcare that didn't have it before. And American families are going to see their health insurance premiums go down. And you're going to see this very substantial reduction in prescription drug prices. So that's a big deal. I think we saw over the course of this pandemic some of the shortcomings in our system. Fundamentally, I just think in the greatest country on the planet, we should embrace the notion that you shouldn't go broke because you get sick, and you shouldn't get sick because you're broke. So what I support is universal affordable health care. And you've seen Paul Krugman, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, say that there's more than one way to get to universal affordable coverage. He points out, for example, that the Dutch system is one of the best in the world with affordable universal coverage. And he refers to that system as what he calls Obamacare done right. And so the question is, how do we build on the progress of the Affordable Care Act and ensure that it's done right? So the approach that I support today is one that I think could actually pass. And you asked about, a Medicare for All proposal, and I know that there's folks who are supportive of that, but it just has nowhere near the votes required to become law. And as you may recall, when President Biden was a candidate for president, he said he wouldn't sign a bill to do that. And so what I support is a plan that President Biden would sign and that I think we could get passed. And that is, one, to protect some of the gains made under the Affordable Care Act. Listen, the Affordable Care Act was a really big deal. It prevented insurers from discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions. It covered preventive care without copay, things like mammograms and cancer screenings and the like. It meant that young people can stay on their parents' insurance until their 26th birthday. And importantly, it treated illnesses above the neck the same as illnesses below the neck, so-called mental health parity. One of the things that I've supported, though, is building on that success. So one of the challenges we have right now is 63% of uninsured Americans qualify for financial assistance for healthcare and don't get it. Nearly half of uninsured Americans qualify for free healthcare and aren't enrolled in any healthcare. So I'm a sponsor of a bill called the Pathway to Universal Coverage Act, again, consistent with this Obamacare done right, that says if you qualify for free healthcare, we're going to enroll you in free healthcare. That would immediately cut the ranks of the uninsured in half. And then the other thing that I support and that the president has said he would support and that he would sign, it's a bigger lift, and I'm not sure we could get it through the United States Senate, but I would support it, is creating a public option. In essence, Medicare for all who want it. That would create more competition with private insurance companies to try to drive down costs, and it would provide an option in areas where private insurers have left the market. So I share that with you also with just the recognition that we're not waiting, right? We're going to pass this bill hopefully within the next week to cover millions more Americans and to reduce premiums for millions and millions of Americans, and provide more affordable prescription drugs for millions, tens of millions of Americans. So we're working on it. And I appreciate the spirit of your question, because I think the status quo is not good enough. We got to do better.
Thanks, Derek. Dr. Jackson?
Yes, Congressman, thank you for coming today. I actually have a chronic disease and use medical cannabis to treat it. So I'm hearing some things that, the Congress is doing this, but the Senate is not going to affect it. And the president isn't really pushing to legalize, or at least decriminalize medical cannabis. So I'm wondering what the current status is, and if you would support at least getting cannabis off the controlled substance list, so research can be sponsored and paid for by the government. So thank you.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, I do. And the House has passed a bill to decriminalize cannabis use. It does some other things too, given the disproportionate impact of the so-called war on drugs on Black and brown communities. It tries to direct some dollars through the taxation of cannabis into addressing some of those historic inequities. We also, in the appropriations bill that passed, included language to prevent the Justice Department from basically going after folks in states that have voted, like ours, that have voted to decriminalize marijuana use. The problem's been the Senate. So far, we just have not seen adequate support from particularly Senate Republicans who have blocked those sorts of reforms at every angle. Frankly, they've even blocked something that I think is absolutely nonsensical to block, and that's just the ability of cannabis businesses to bank. I mean, you look at the number of crimes that have been committed, the number of robberies that have been committed for marijuana-related businesses in our state, and it's jaw-dropping. I mean, it's basically a crime a day. And part of that is because they're all cash businesses. And so there's a bill called the Safe Banking Act. It's bipartisan in the House. There's not a lot of Republicans on it. But for the life of me, I do not understand why Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans are blocking that from becoming law. So appreciate the question, Dr. Jackson.
No problem. Thank you for the answer.
You bet.
Hey, Daryl? You're muted, Daryl. Daryl, you're muted. There you go.
Good morning, and thank you, Representative Kilmer.
You bet.
Could you go with this issues and legislation that you are working successfully across the aisle with?
Yeah, there's a lot that I work on in this space. Probably the most significant is the appropriations process, right? What's interesting, a lot of it doesn't get a lot of attention, Daryl, to be honest with you, because, some of it's under the radar, right? When we, as we just did this year, secured record funding for Puget Sound recovery, it wasn't just Derek Kilmer working on that. We worked with my Washington state colleagues on the appropriations committee, Jamie Herrera Butler and Dan Newhouse, to secure those funds. And similarly, I work with them to secure funding on Hanford cleanup, which is not in my district, but our state definitely needs some federal help to get that cleaned up. I mentioned that the law that the president's going to sign on Tuesday in the CHIPS Act includes a big economic development bill that I wrote and that I introduced with Jamie Herrera Butler from the southern part of our state. That is a bill to provide some long-term federal assistance to communities that have faced persistent economic distress. That could be a game changer. I mean, it's a really big deal. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of communities that I visit, the number of neighborhoods that I visit, where when I talk to people, there's a real concern that their main export is going to be young people, that we're not going to have the opportunities for young people to stay in the communities where they grew up. And providing that help from the Economic Development Administration. I mean, we got in the bill the president's going to sign. It's $1 billion for those investments to help distressed communities. That's a pilot program, but that is a big deal, and it was bipartisan. I didn't talk about it in my remarks, but I'll try to keep this brief. I chair a committee in Congress called the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, which makes us sound like we're the IT help desk. But we've been nicknamed the Fix Congress Committee, which usually either gets people to giggle or to offer to pray for me. I do appreciate the prayers, and anytime we're working on fixing Congress, I think I need your prayers. But, in a very under the radar way, you're never going to hear about this on cable news, and it's not a viral phenomenon on social media. Our bipartisan committee has now passed over 170 recommendations focused on making Congress work better. And about 3/4 of them have either been implemented or are on the path toward implementation. Some of it's some big stuff around reforms to the budget and appropriations process, some reforms to even things like how do you make Congress more civil and collaborative, which is hard in a place that, too often resembles the Jerry Springer show. But we're working to try to make that better. So those are some examples of some work I'm doing in a bipartisan way.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Yeah, for sure.
Representative Kilmer, there was a group of legislators, both Democrats and Republicans, several years ago that you worked with to see how both parties could work in a common direction. Is that group still meeting?
It does, yeah. It's we fly in on a Monday or a Tuesday, and then the next morning we meet for breakfast. And and sometimes those meetings are hard, right? I mean, after the 6th of January last year, it was really hard to get in a room with some of my Republican colleagues. Or when you're talking about immigration or healthcare or trying to address gun violence, or the Supreme Court decision around reproductive freedom. Those can be feisty conversations, but I actually think we got to get better about, engaging one another, even when we disagree with one another. I'll mention one other thing on that front, Lyle. Coming out of that group, we actually introduced some legislation, and it started in Tacoma. It started with a meeting, and some of you may have been at it. And we'll remember this. Remember last fall, there was a series of attacks, unfortunately, on religious institutions in Tacoma. The Islamic Center was burned to the ground. 2 Buddhist faith leaders were assaulted outside their temple. A church got vandalized, all within the span of 3 weeks. And after that, in the spirit of something good coming out of something bad, there was an interfaith event held at Tacoma Community College where people of all sorts of faiths and some with no faith at all showed up and said, hey, that's not what we're about. That part of living in a religiously and otherwise diverse, pluralistic democracy is you got to be able to live next to people who think and look and pray different than you do without it coming to violence or conflict. It was a really powerful 90 minutes at Tacoma Community College. And afterwards, one of the faith leaders came up to me and said, that was really good. But if we were going to do this right, we would do this on an ongoing basis. It wouldn't just be a 90-minute conversation. It would be a conversation where we engage our community all the time. And they said, just out of curiosity, if we tried to pull something together like that, is there any federal support for something like that? And I said, not really, at least not currently. And then a month later, Courtney and I visited the YMCA, one of the YMCAs here in our region, thinking they were going to talk to us about, gymnasiums losing money because of the pandemic. That's not what they wanted to talk about. They said, you know what? All the toxicity that you see in Washington, D.C., all of the polarization that we all see on cable news has shown up in our YMCA. They said, we're literally having fights break out in our YMCA over pick your red or blue issue. And this has become so bad that we can't ignore it anymore. So we've hired a consultant that's going to train our staff and train our board in conflict resolution. We're actually going to try to host some events to have people talk to each other across their differences rather than having fights breaking out. And they said, this has been an expensive undertaking. Is there any federal support for something like this? And I said, not really. And why? So why do I tell you this? We just introduced a bill, 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans, called the Building Civic Bridges Act. And it's to provide some federal support to local community organizations that are trying to build bridges across lines of difference, whether that be a YMCA or an interfaith group or the Black Collective, trying to actually just have dialogue within our communities. Because here's what's troubling to me. It's not just the local examples that trouble me, Lyle. There were 2 polls that came out earlier this year that trouble me. One, they asked Americans, do you agree or disagree with this statement? America is so divided, it is no longer capable of solving big problems. 70% of those polled agreed with that statement. I find that really troubling because we have big problems that need to be solved. They asked another poll, what's called, it was a battleground poll, which seems fitting given the poll question. They said on a scale of 0 to 100, with 0 being no conflict and 100 being civil war, where do you place the United States? Yeah. And the mean score was a 70. Yeah. I find it really troubling that, the American people on average believe we are more than 2/3 of the way to civil war. And I think my reaction is I don't want to just accept that, right? And, frankly, it's part of the reason that the work of the Black Collective is really important. It's part of the reason that that interfaith effort is really important. It's part of the reason that the work that the YMCA is doing is really important. And here's the thing. The federal government does provide support for trying to support civic bridge building and to build social cohesion as a means of strengthening democracy. We do that already through the National Endowment for Democracy in other countries. We do it to support democracy in other countries, but we don't do it here in America. And I think given the state of things, we ought to do that here in America. So that's a bill we just introduced with 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans, and it came out of that bipartisan working group.
And it's important that we know and understand that. It is important that we know where you stand. It is important to hear the facts that you bring us, but it's also important for us to know what you believe, where your value propositions are, what your moral compass is. And you continue to, I think, represent the best of this community and represent us locally, but also represent us in Washington, D.C. So we just have a couple more minutes. If there are any closing comments you would like to make, Representative Kilmer or Courtney. Let me just say this about Courtney. Courtney, thank you so much for helping us coordinate this event. I put Courtney on our Friday email conversation leading up to this to let her know that we had you in the queue. And I think the last time you came, we were a little bit dodgy about our communication. I didn't want to repeat that. So thank you, Courtney. And any final comments you have, Representative Kilmer, before we move to the agenda?
Let me just say, one, thanks. Thanks for having me. I know Courtney put her contact information into the chat and the information about signing up for our email newsletter. If you don't get it, I welcome you to sign up for it. If you had a question that we didn't get to, feel free to email me. I work for you. That's how this works. So if you or someone you know has an issue, has a question, needs help with a federal agency, please do reach out to us. And finally, I just want to end where I started, which is with gratitude to the Black Collective. Our community is stronger because of you. And the fact that you let me every now and then spend a little time on your agenda, I'm grateful for that too. So count us on the home team and keep us on the speed dial if there's something we can do to help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks, Wayne. I appreciate that. That is absolutely right. So we're going to move our agenda. You see our